On this episode of Carnage, we're wiring up our V8 Lexcen with a Haltech ECU. We are coming down to the pointy end of this project, which means we have to wire in our V8 quad cam engine to our Lexcen wagon. And we have a Haltech ECU to do that. This is the ECU out of the Trollbase. So it's an Elite 2000, which Haltech no longer make. They make the 2500, which is what they sent to us probably best part of 2 years ago when we started this project. I know it's been that long. And then we pinched that ECU and stuck it in the MX-5, and then the MX-5 went 8, so it'll be hanging on to that ECU for a little bit longer. But we don't need the 2500. Originally we were going to go drive-by-wire, now we're not, so we don't need the 2500. We can use this and it will work perfectly well. We also got an IC7 dash there. We have a 3D printed insert to go into the cluster, so I'll wire that in. We've got a wideband controller there as well, and an unterminated choose your own adventure loom. So that's going to be fun. I also have plenty of flexible sheathing, more heat shrink than any mortal man could possess, and a lot of, injector and coil plugs, which we will terminate. I do have some experience in this field from my days back when I used to work for Telstra 30 years ago. I used to terminate, 200 pair harnesses and wires and stuff like that. So I'm not scared of some wiring, but this will be the first time that I'm actually making my own engine loom. So it's going to be exciting, and you're going to join the adventure with me. I also have to cut back a lot of this unnecessary stuff from the loom. So there's a lot of injector plugs there that we won't use because they're from the V6, There's the coil connection. There's the original transmission connection. So that was for a 4L60E, which we're not using. In fact, our transmission will require no sort of inputs at all other than trans brake, because that's all it has. It has no electronics, which is the way I like them. So yes, we're going turbo 400 with a quad cam V8 with a trans brake. This thing will be glorious. So anyway, there's a lot to do on this. Let's hook in, starting by disconnecting the factory ECU and pushing some of this wiring back through the firewall. So as with all Commodores of this era, the ECU is behind the kick panel on the passenger side. There's just two plugs that run to it. The ECU is a little bit larger on these models because it's the first of the computer controlled transmission cars. So, the earlier cars like your VNs and VPs didn't have any computer controls for the transmission. So they had a smaller ECU. Now they've got a larger ECU because they have to control their transmission. We don't need any of that because we're running the Haltech. So that's going bye-byes, and the Haltech will probably sit there instead. All right, we'll whip it out. Well, that was simple. Literally one screw. Going. That's fun. Dum dum da. Right. Now we have a hole through the firewall to run our Haltech. This is where the real fun begins. So we're using our Haltech ECU, which can drive just about everything we need in the car. It has two connection points. Obviously we're going to need, wires for 8 coils, 8 injectors, all the sensors. We're going to treat the engine as its own little thing. We've got the board there with all the sensors and stuff that we need. What I need to do is actually rearrange that a little bit and split it into what's on the engine. Injectors, coils, sensors, you know, crank trigger, cam trigger, inlet air temp, water temp, oil pressure, all that sort of stuff. And then we have fuel pumps and thermofans and all that sort of stuff that's not on the engine but that's still controlled through the Haltech, so they will plug in via different connectors. That's the way I'm going to set it up. And obviously, yeah, fuel pumps are at the back of the car. We've got obviously fuel pressure sensor as well, flex fuel sensor. So there's a lot going on, so we'll split it off into different areas, but generally this will go up under the dash. We have two connectors there that plug in the top. We have a CAN bus as well, which will control our dash and our wideband. But yeah, the other stuff we will split off on the other side of the firewall, and we'll do, yeah, like I said, a separate harness basically for our coils, our injectors, our sensors on the engine. So having the engine there will make it good, because then I'll be able to make measurements. We'll probably use some, you know, thin rope or something to get the sizes for the lengths that we'll need. I'll have everything come up through the engine, and we'll peel it off to this side, because obviously that's the side our hole is through the firewall. So we'll have everything come across to here, have a connection point, so if we ever have to yank the engine, we can just disconnect the connector and then yank the whole engine without having to individually unhook every wire off the engine. That is our plan. So we're coming up towards the end of the week. I'm going to continue mapping this stuff out. I'll get it to a point where I'm happy to start cutting and connecting. So when you see me next, I should have this fairly mapped out, and then we can go into a whole terminating frenzy, and Matt can do a massive montage of terminating, heat shrinking. I've got so much heat shrink, I bought a whole tub of DR25 heat shrink. So this will not only do this car, we can do our next project car with that as well, because we obviously got to do a lot of stuff with that, being a very serious build. And we've got our sheathing, we've got connectors, injector, coil connectors, we've got it all. So I'm going to spend the next day or so mapping this out, and when we come back to it, you'll see it all laid out, and then we can go into a massive cutting and connecting frenzy. So I've been working all this out, and it's been fun with a capital F, that's for sure. Anyway, I have pulled back the loom a little bit. I've pulled back some of the wires, so I've got battery positive, battery negative. I've got the fuel pump activation, and also the ECU 12 volt switched, all that sort of stuff. So that will go back to the ECU plugs, which we already know where we're going to mount the ECU. We only need like a foot of wire from the ECU to the firewall, but we're going to probably have a bit longer. So what I'm going to do is cut the whole loom there basically, and use this motorsport connector. So it's a 47 pin connector, and then this side mounts to the firewall, and you've got a line at the top, and then this one also has a line at the top. Match the lines, screw it together when you've mounted it properly. Screw it together, it clips, and then if you ever want to pull the engine, you can unclip it, disconnect, and pull the whole engine without having to undo every single connector in the engine bay. Very handy. It has 47 pins, as I said before, but 5 of those pins are 16 gauge, and the rest are all 20 gauge. So as the numbers get smaller, the diameters get larger. So 16 gauge is a thicker wire and connector than a 20 gauge. So for the 16 gauge stuff, we'll use that where we need extra power, like, you know, say the ignition, like the coil power wires and the injector power wires, which will then be branched out afterwards. But generally, the 20 gauge stuff will serve whatever we need. There's more than 47 wires there, but we don't need 47 wires because that is what we need. It's on the list, so we will have some spares. Anyway, I've already marked out kind of, this is where we are and this is where we probably will be. So we'll make a cut in there, and that way we've already identified what is what on either side of where the cut's going to be. So we'll get to cutting, get to terminating, terminate the firewall stuff first, and then we'll match it up with the engine bay stuff, and then we can build the rest of the loom out, which we have already measured out on the engine. Let's get to work. We'll start things off with the easy stuff first. So we have 9 wires there for coils. We will have to expand on that. And then we have 9 wires for injectors, which we also have to expand on a little bit, but not as much as the coils. So injectors, 2 wires per injector. We have 8 wires, so each of those 8 wires will go to 8 individual injectors, and then we need to splice out this wire into 2 groups of 4, so for each bank down the engine. But we'll separate it out first. On this side, again, we've got 8 wires for the coils, and then we'll have to branch out our power wire to those 8 wires as well, so 2 groups of 4. But we also have to include a ground wire because they are smart coils now, and we need 3 wires per coil, and then we'll have to integrate an earth, which will then probably earth to the back of the block. So yeah, anyway, let's split them out, put them in our plug. Deep breaths. Before we get too carried away here, we do need to put some sheathing over this stuff. So there's a little terminal sheath for this connector. Well, actually goes that way. All right, and then we've got heat shrink, which I mentioned before. This is the good stuff. This is Raychem DR25. All right, so this is the stuff that's you know, resistant to fuels and oils and heat and all that sort of stuff. Well, heat to an extent, it's heat shrink, but yeah. So we've cut a length of that as well. So we've got a heap of that stuff in various sizes, which is very handy to have, especially when you're doing these sort of jobs. All right, let's start putting some pins on wires, and then we can start poking them in them holes. Haltech have thankfully sent us out a bunch of Deutsch connectors. So this is a DT connector, so it's good for these 16 gauge plugs. We also have a DTM one. The hole is smaller. That'll be for the 20 gauge wires. So if you need some good tools, jump on the Haltech website and order some. They're not that expensive, considering if you're going to do stuff like this, you want the best tools. All right. So there's our first one done. Let's do the other 8, and they have to be 20 gauge ones, which are these little pins. That is a lot of tiny, tiny pins. So we're almost there with our plug. We have 5 spots left, and so many more wires. I don't know. Some of these obviously are spares, but I think I've got all our sensors and things accounted for. Yeah, I'm pretty confident we're almost there. So some of these might have to get just coiled up and tucked away as spares, and if we need to break them out later, well, so be it. But yeah, we're about ready to start pinning into our connector. Wouldn't that be fun? So we're working with the Haltech Premium harness. So it has a fuse and relay block there as part of the deal. Obviously pre-terminated plugs for the ECU, and then they pre-assign certain wires for things in the harness, but some of the stuff you're going to have to, as I've said before, choose your own adventure, because some of the stuff's not assigned, so you have to find it. It's a great idea to download these off the Haltech website. That gives you an idea. Make sure you get the right one for your harness, because every harness is slightly different. Like if you get a harness for, say, a Elite 2000, it's going to be different to this harness, and so on and so forth. So we've got the Elite 2500 harness, even though we're only using the 2000 ECU. Plugs are the same. That's all good. And obviously we've assigned a whole bunch of stuff. So we've only got a few more to assign. I've got to get one more AVI out for our fuel pressure sensor. Now, this is the big thing. It's like you've got AVIs, you've got DPOs, you've got SPIs, blah, blah, blah. Basically, if it ends with an I, it's an input, so it's probably a sensor or something. If it ends with an O, it's an output. So it's basically you're trying to control something like thermofans or whatever, trans brakes, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, just something to wrap your head around when you're doing these things. But all right, let's pull out 3 more wires for our fuel pressure sensor. What have we got there? Label makers are cool. This is not fun. Well, I am going to have to admit defeat on this particular plug. I'm not really happy with it. It's just, I cannot get connectors to seat in there. Like, I've got half of them in, and there's some of them that I have literally spent an hour trying to get the pin in the hole, get it to seat, and it will not seat, and it's just driving me insane. So I'm going to cut away this plug and start again. I've gone and bought this mil-spec connector. I've already done a test with that, and it's already looking to be better, so it is what it is. Yeah, so we'll use this one. But yeah, this is driving me insane. I've been working on this for the best part of 2 days now, and my fingers are numb and it's just not working. So let's not talk about it anymore. I'm just done with that, and it obviously means that we are not going to be wired in the car this video because this is going to put me way behind. So I'm going to have to redo a lot of the work that I've just done. So let's talk about some happier thoughts. Like the fact that we've had all our turbo piping coated by race coatings, all right? So the headers and the crossover all done in black, which is good to like 12 or 1300 degrees Celsius, like, so it's good stuff. And then the turbine housing and obviously the pipe going off to our wastegate is all done in the chrome sort of polished finish, which looks amazing. The whole thing looks amazing. I'm really stoked with it, you know. We didn't bother with the screamer pipe because no one's ever going to see that. But it looks fantastic and I'm really stoked. And this coating, we've got that on the MX-5 as well, and it still looks shiny. It still looks great. So really good stuff. And obviously it'll help us control all the heat in the engine bay. I mean, you know, radiators right there. We're going to have a lot of wiring over this thing. So, you know, we don't want to melt any of that. So controlling the heat is a big thing. So now we just need to get it into the car and get it all hooked up and obviously wired up, which is not going to happen this episode, unfortunately, but no doubt you'll see it all on a future episode of Carnage.